Start streaming, and then we'll sub out the battery for you so you get a fresh battery. And when you're done, you hit stop. And I'll just show you where they're being archived in our Vimeo library right here. What Will Short is going to do is rename them at the end of each session. So it could not be easier. The only thing you might want to be aware of is, you notice in the morning session, like Carter stood over by the piano, so I just tracked the camera over there. But I don't really anticipate moving the camera at all.
Okay, and so what program is this?
It's called OBS. I'm not sure what that stands for, but this is the live streaming software that Brian Malowski would use. That we used for this, that we used for athletics yesterday. And again, it could not be easier. It uploads immediately to...
So I don't have to start recording or anything like that?
All you do is hit start streaming. Correct. Yeah, make sure the camera's on.
And do you stream the whole thing, or do you...
I just went through the whole thing, and that keeps it all as one chunk of video. So that we can send that link out. And Will likely send me the link, and then I'll forward to the prospective teacher. But I just sent out the link for the ones yesterday to the teacher and the kid that presented. They can send it to their families, and their families can navigate to it in the video.
Sounds good.
So, yeah, it worked out really well. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so if we could get our seats, we want to get started. We have 3 great presentations. Started.
Okay. Today I will be talking about school interventions. My project is on school interventions. So for some of you guys who don't know what school interventions are, a school intervention is a system set in place for schools that help improve students' quality of learning and life growing up. And some school poverty interventions focus on one's social life, while some others focus on academics. My central question was, what is the most effective poverty intervention created throughout history, and how has the creation of the public education system been affected through these interventions? So before I go more into my topic, I just wanted to tell you guys why I wanted to research this topic. On the left is a picture of my dad. He has been in the education world for as long as I remember. And on the right is our kids. One of my, I volunteered at this program called Step Up, and it was from kids from the ages of 12 to 15, where they either had or failed during the school year or just couldn't attend school due to their own circumstances. And it was a summer program where they would take it and then they would have to pass for them to go on to the next grade level. So that's why I wanted to research and how I could help the education world in the future. So the measures for most effective are what kind of positives do the interventions give to the schools, and the statistical evidence of improvement on students' academics and behaviors. So before we go into statistics, I will be talking about the history of public education. On April 23rd, 1635, the first public school in America was established in Boston, Massachusetts. The school is called Boston Latin School and was initially intended to educate young men for them to go off to college. Jefferson was the first American leader to suggest the public education system. The public schools were inaccessible until 1779, when Jefferson proposed a vote for the more general diffusion of knowledge. This bill proposed a system where the schools were funded by the taxes people paid. The schools were for all free children, male and female. But the beginning of the public education system actually started with a man named Horace Mann. In Massachusetts, he started the publication of the Common School Journal, which takes educational issues to public attention. They believe that better access to public education would create better citizens, unite society as a whole, and lessen the crime and poverty rates. Due to these efforts, public education became available by the end of the 19th century. In 1852, Massachusetts passes the first compulsory school attendance law for public schools, and following Massachusetts, New York passed the same law in 1853. And after 1918, all states had passed laws that required children to attend elementary school at least. And the compulsory attendance and children's labor law reduced children's participation in the labor force. It also increased the literacy rates in the United States. Schools' roles were also for social agents, taking children of immigrants and poor children to promote civic development and literacy. Lastly, education was a primary vehicle for lifting people out of poverty. So in 1925, with their desires, the Catholics went through the Piers for Society of Sisters to not force children to only attend public schools, but also attend private schools as well. Through the creation of more accessible public education and private education systems, more laws towards the mandatory attendance of students to go to school increased, and after the laws are passed in 1852, as mentioned before, by the mid-1900s, all states had passed some sort of compulsory attendance law that required at least 12 weeks of school, and soon that changes to 36 weeks of school. And by 2006, all children between the ages of 6 and 17 in Massachusetts are required to attend school. So this is the Common School. The Common School movement opened the doors to more co-educational systems, yet it was not completely effective because of the persistent socioeconomic inequalities that restricted fair access to education for children from impoverished, marginalized backgrounds. The Common School movement opened the doors to the co-educational high school system, which first opened in Lowell, Massachusetts. The Common School was created because the founding fathers believed education was important for sustaining democracy in the United States, and they advocated for schools that were more accessible to all children, free for families, and funded by the government. They believed by doing so, it would enhance literacy, morality, and workforce skills, which would benefit the whole nation. And even though the Common School movement allowed a lot of positive effects and potential for a lot of children and families, it still faced a lot of challenges. Some of these challenges included lack of large-scale improvements, isolation of poor children, conflicting policies, teachers taking the blame, and some resistance from Americans. And these issues ended up leading the Common School movement to a failure, yet allowed more school interventions to rise from this. The Head Start program has become a significant modern intervention that aims for the support of early childhood development and addresses the disparities in education for families in poverty. The Head Start program supports children's growth from birth to ages of 5. The Head Start program is created around early learning, centered around early learning and development, health and family well-being. The program was created in the early 1960s by former President Lyndon B. Johnson, which is on the left. The reasoning behind it targeting such a young audience is due to their thought that the first 3 years of one's life critically affects the life one has in the future. This program serves more than solely educational purposes. It also affects the personal life and well-being of the family and children. The program's positive include the greater involvement of parents with the children and allows connection between families and health services. And due to a more recent establishment of the program and even having preschools enrolled in this program currently, the statistics reported of the positive is shown as here. A study, according to some researchers, states that low-income children who participated in the program were 2.5% more likely to finish high school, 8.5% were likely to enroll in college, and 39% were likely to finish college. And even though with these positive outcomes shown here, the numbers are not that significant, there are some cons to the program as well. There's unequal access to the program. There are also experiments stating that the program is ineffective. A study states that by the end of first grade, children who attend the Head Starts are usually indistinguishable from a control group of students who didn't. And the researchers measured the improvements of the students through 44 different academic tests at the end of first grade. The results of the test showed no difference from one another except a few tests, which after statistical controls, they were shown to be no different than others. So the study proved the significant low impact of the Head Start program compared to other programs. The breakfast program, or the school meal program, was established while being significantly influenced by the Black Panther Party in 1969. This initiative was created with the belief that children could not learn would not be able to learn and succeed in academics on an empty stomach. The program highlighted the connections between nutrition and academic performances. The initiative not only increased attendance and academic output, but also emphasized the significance of supporting children's well-being in hopes of creating a welcoming learning environment. A researcher looked at the outcomes of schools that had a school meal program. Around 17.5% of the students had a higher score in standardized math tests. There were also 1.5 increase in the attendance rate daily on average. Even though there were a lot of positives, there were also a lot of limitations to the program. If a student was late to school, they wouldn't be able to get free breakfast in the morning. Or if one takes the school bus, the schedules for school buses were not flexible enough for them to get meals in the morning. It also was limited in the sense that it wouldn't affect the behavior or make a significant difference in the academic aspects. And the multi-tiered system is a framework for enhancing the implementation of evidence-based practices to achieve important outcomes for every student. So the MTSS consists of 3 different tiers that the students can be assigned to. The students can move among 3 tiers where one is placed is not dependent on specific learning disabilities or diagnoses. How one moves is determined by data from universal screeners, diagnosis assessments, progress monitoring, and student responses to the level designated. The key components of the MTSS is taking action before waiting for failure. It also is a proactive approach to identifying students with academic and behavioral needs. Some of the implementation of the MTSS are set in really early stages such as preschool. The support of the system is through the school and high school as well. The different stages allow for the students to get help to their fullest, and there are also parent involvements which allow for a better experience of families being connected to children preschool as well. So how do they identify students? How do they identify students that need help? The schools use a universal screening system at the start of the year, such as FastBridge or START assessments. After the first screening at the start of the year, there are more screenings done periodically throughout the year for math, reading, and social emotional behaviors. And out of the interventions, the multi-MTSS is most effective because of its early identification using data-driven decision-making, collaboration among the educators and parents in the different tiers, which allow personalized support. Between the previous years, researchers looked at the results of those schools that went through the MTSS. A researcher investigated the association of MTSS and the student outcomes in elementary, middle, and high schools over the 4 years on the East Coast. The researcher used suspension rates and academic achievement scores in reading, math, and language to measure the influence of MTSS. So in 2019, there were 30% less suspension rates, 5% fewer behavioral referrals than non-MTSS schools. And they were also higher fidelity in the reading domain and above average or above proficient on the language mechanics measure. Another research was in 2015. A researcher in Kansas sent out a survey to schools using MTSS, and this was looked upon through 500 schools in Kansas. Schools with MTSS were moving towards higher stages of implementation and showed increased proficiency in state assessments. There was also a significant decrease in office discipline referrals and a decrease in the special education referrals. One stated that there are students scoring at benchmark, which were 89.5%, students scoring at proficient on the state assessment, which were 70.3%, a decrease in office discipline referrals, which was 77.1%, and a decrease in special education referrals, which was 63.4%. So my conclusion for the paper was that the MTSS is most effective because it has a conjoined system of multiple interventions and has statistically significant outcomes and allows for the personalization for different students. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
You talked about the Head Start program having inequalities and how it was like distributed. What were those inequalities?
It was just, they had like selected numbers of people they could take, and they couldn't take everyone that needed help, so that was like, and the way that they chose was just not fair for everybody.
Any other questions? Yep.
I'm curious if you works for folks who use with public funds for private education as an intervention?
I did not look at that. I just looked at public, I just looked at these 3 interventions, so.
I could be mistaken. I believe starting last year, did Massachusetts public schools start doing a free lunch program for everyone?
Yeah, they
Remember
did.
correct? Has there been any data on if that now has made any sort of substantial impact on communities and schools?
No, I didn't specifically look in Massachusetts, so I didn't look at the data, but I looked at just like over general data from like a few years ago, so, yeah. Thank you.
You should just plug right in. Good. You'll need to toggle the input on the remote. So it's
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bryce Ackroyd, and today I'm giving a presentation on the Troubles in Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement which brought an end to them. The Troubles was a significant event in Irish history and have scarred and changed Great Britain and Ireland with changes that can still be seen today. I'll be going in depth into a lot of different factors that played into the Troubles and the Good Friday Agreement over the course of this presentation, but the overarching goal is to answer these 2 essential questions that have guided my research on the topic. The questions are, what were the Irish Troubles, and how has this period of conflict shaped current dynamics in Northern Ireland and Great Britain? And how has the Good Friday Agreement helped put a lasting end to the conflict, and why did it succeed where other treaties may have failed? So first off, when I tell people about my topic for presentation, it's usually pretty hit or miss when people know what the Troubles are. So with this being the focus of my presentation, I think it's pretty important to have a clear explanation about what they are and why they happened. The Troubles was a period of conflict mainly in Northern Ireland that spanned roughly 3 decades, lasting from late 1960s all the way until 1998, when the Good Friday Agreement put an end to them. To understand the Troubles, we need to go back a few hundred years. Ireland was historically under British rule, going all the way back to the 12th century, when the Normans invaded and conquered major towns on the east coast. The British, for a long time, had been viewed as the oppressors by the Irish people, and this led to centuries of warring tension among the Irish states and the British Empire. There were many notable uprisings as a result of this, such as the Irish Rebellion of 1798 and the Easter Uprising in the early 20th century, which led to the partitioning of the island in 1921 and the creation of Northern Ireland as a British state. Northern Ireland was mainly Protestant and wished to stay part of the United Kingdom, so they were often referred to as Unionists or Loyalists, whereas the predominantly Catholic South became the Republic of Ireland and were often referred to as Nationalists or Republicans. And this is a map of what we're talking about. Northern Ireland is obviously in the north. This partition created a unique situation. Northern Ireland housed a Catholic minority who largely identified as Irish and sought unity with the Republic of Ireland, whereas the Protestant majority wished to remain part of the UK and identified as British. With the Protestants being the majority, there were many laws and socioeconomic inequalities that either directly or indirectly favored Protestants, such as voting inequality and lack of political representation as a result of this. Catholic schools were often underfunded when compared to Protestant schools and were segregated on the basis of religion. And as you can imagine, this led to some pretty thick tension between the 2 religious groups. But the Troubles officially began in the late 1960s with an event called the Derry March. This march was organized by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association to protest voting rights that disproportionately favored Protestant landowners. Since the majority of Catholics in Northern Ireland were in the lower income bracket, they rented property instead of buying it. And law at the time stated that you could only vote in local elections if you were a landowner. So the landlords had multiple votes based on the number of tenants that they had, whereas the tenants themselves weren't actually able to vote. Looking at this today, it's pretty clear why this wasn't fair. These were sort of the advantages that the Protestants had over the Catholics in Northern Ireland. But let's actually go on to the Derry March itself. Because of the political connotations with this march, Loyalists saw this as a nationalist claim on their iconic city of Derry and banned it. But the march continued anyways, and the police forcibly dispersed the crowd and used excessive force and violence to do so. I have a quote from someone who attended the rally. His name is Jeremy McClanahan, and he told this to BBC during an interview. And I quote, "The marchers just stopped at the end of Craigavon Bridge, with the police all lined up in front of them. Ivan Cooper and some others were making speeches, and I think the police must have thought that there was no way out and attacked them. They beat people to the ground viciously. And I thought there was more to this than just keeping order. This is about teaching them a lesson. It was about civil rights. They were showing us they thought we had no right to exist. They were doing it with an arrogance that only could have come from the state. The blood was awful and the violence was awful." So the Derry March is often referred to as the beginning of the Troubles. So as the protests escalated, violence broke out between nationalist unionist communities, paramilitary groups, and eventually British soldiers who were sent to the island to restore order. The Irish Republican Army, the IRA, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before, fought on the side of the nationalists and responded to the Derry March with multiple bombings, such as the Warrington bombing, which severely injured 56 people and ended up killing a 3-year-old boy. The IRA targeted densely populated areas to inflict as much damage as possible and targeted civilians on the grounds of their religious affiliation. Another event that only added fuel to the fire was Bloody Sunday, which I'm sure many of you have also heard of. It was yet another civil rights protest held in Derry by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. But on Bloody Sunday, the tensions between British soldiers and protesters was incredibly high. Some protesters started throwing rocks at the British, and feeling threatened, the British soldiers opened fire upon the protesters, killing 13 and injuring 14. This caused the hatred between the two groups only to grow, and all the tensions that had been building up over centuries exploded all at once. Overall, the Troubles claimed the lives of 3,740 people on both sides and resulted in the injury of approximately 47,500. It became clear very quickly to the British government that something needed to be done about this violence, and it wasn't going to solve itself. And that's where the Good Friday Agreement comes into this. The IRA called a ceasefire in August of 1994, and after years of stalled peace talks, the Good Friday Agreement was finally signed in April of 1998. This historic agreement was brokered by multiple parties with significant input from, obviously, both the British and Irish governments, as well as support from the United States. This agreement created a devolved government in Northern Ireland that created the Northern Ireland Assembly, which established a power-sharing executive. What this basically meant is that Northern Ireland now had its own legislature, separate from the British government, that was created to promote cooperation and representation from both nationalist and unionist communities to make decisions about the future of Northern Ireland. It set up cross-border institutions to improve cooperation between the two states, and one of the agreement's most crucial points was that Northern Ireland's status would only change with majority's consent. So Northern Ireland would remain a part of the United Kingdom unless the majority voted for unification with Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement also opened borders between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to allow free movement and cooperation among the two nations through trade and travel. This was also a significant symbolic gesture of peace and trust. The Good Friday Agreement also included a formal apology from the British government for the past wrongdoings and violence, and sought to rebuild the bridge between the two nations. It also, importantly, called for the disposal of weapons that belonged to paramilitary groups, most prominently the IRA, and to encourage peaceful negotiation and put an end to violence. Here is a graph that shows the violence in Northern Ireland, and you can see the IRA ceasefire in 1994 and the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, being signed in 1998. And as you can see, it did a pretty good job of promoting peace in Northern Ireland. This agreement effectively ended the Troubles and marked a shift from the conflict to the peaceful negotiation. The signing of the Good Friday Agreement was a remarkable achievement, and it brought together communities that had been polarized by violence and injustice and laid the groundwork for lasting peace. Northern Ireland today, and sort of where it stands. The Good Friday Agreement is still an important basis of peace in Northern Ireland, and it represents one of the few instances in recent history where a deeply rooted conflict was resolved through diplomacy and compromise. It also serves as a role model for what successful peace talks and cooperation can accomplish when effort and diligent work are put in to resolve a long-standing problem. Today, however, Brexit also poses a challenge for the Good Friday Agreement. Brexit caused the need to reinstate a hard border with customs and checkpoints, which could cause further separation between the two countries. Many citizens in Northern Ireland also feel as though Brexit might erode Northern Ireland's status within the United Kingdom and, in turn, undermine their British identity. This, combined with economic and other social impacts for the citizens of both countries, potentially puts the peace that the Good Friday Agreement worked so hard to forge at risk. Unfortunately, there are still many scars left over from the Troubles that can be seen in large cities like Belfast. There are still large barriers called peace walls, which is what the picture on the left is, that separate predominantly Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods. Many schools still have a majority of one religious group in them, and many Catholics and Protestants don't interact with each other as a result of the high tension between the two religious groups. The streets are no longer as violent as they used to be, and time is healing the wounds that both sides felt during the Troubles. And so here are the summaries and key takeaways and the answers to the essential questions that I had at the beginning. 1, the Troubles were a violent and complex period of unrest that erupted because of long-standing religious and socioeconomic disparities between Catholic nationalists and Protestant unionists. And 2, the Good Friday Agreement was a turning point that provided a framework for peace and cooperation by providing a space where both parties can come to formal agreements and end violence that lasted centuries. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
So my question was surrounding the numbers of the people that passed during the Troubles. You said it was like a little over 3,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Do you happen to know what the breakup is of nationalists versus loyalists people?
Yeah. So the nationalists, the IRA, the paramilitary group that fought inside of the nationalists, there was a lot of killing of civilians who were unionists, but a lot of the deaths that took place during the Troubles were British soldiers.
Okay.
So you'll see a lot of the death goes to paramilitary groups like the IRA, and then the British soldiers, but not as much civilians of Northern Ireland.
Okay, so would you say it was like from both sides of the conflict, was it, from what you found, like equal loss on both sides, or was it more so like British soldiers?
Pretty close to equal between the IRA and the British soldiers.
Okay, because the reason I asked that is because you said the British government thought there needed to, something needs to be done about the violence, and I was just thinking about, obviously they have a stake on it if they have people being
Right.
killed in a high number as well.
Right.
I suppose.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is about the sort of transnational dimensions of this, right? So the way that I'm seeing it is that there was this real kind of culmination point in the 1960s, but like in terms of what else was happening in the world, right? I'm thinking about the civil rights movement, I'm thinking about decolonization, and both of those are present, right? You mentioned that some of the catalysts were over political rights. Is that correct? Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And then also, famously, Ireland actually had England's first colonies when they began to extend overseas before they went to the Americas. So I was wondering if in your research there were any sort of clues or references to those larger global forces maybe influencing this? They must have had an awareness of civil rights and decolonization, but did that enter into how they talked about their movement?
So a lot of what I've heard about, I did a lot of research on the Irish Rebellion of 1798 as well, because that was an important part of this. And I know a lot of ideas from then were influenced by the French Revolution at that time. I'm not super familiar with the Troubles in the 1960s about if there were any things that impacted it there. I'm sure the civil rights movement had a lot to play into it, and I'm sure the decolonization of a lot of states had to do with it as well. Kieran?
What was your personal interest in this topic?
Oh yeah, my personal interest. So my dad's side of the family is partially Irish. I have a little bit of Irish heritage, but I don't know much about the history of Ireland. I do remember, however, in 7th or 8th grade, listening to some music, hearing the Troubles mentioned, hearing a lot of talk about Catholics versus Protestants, and I was really curious, and I really had no idea what was going on between it. And I remember having a week-long phase where I just would look at it during class, look at it on Wikipedia, and try to learn as much about it. And I thought this was sort of the perfect opportunity to sort of dive back into that and learn more about it. Ms. Sear.
Can you, so there's walls kind of dividing the neighborhoods. Is that more symbolism now, or, can you walk through it? Is there a way to get through it, or do people just keep on their own sides? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, you can get through it. Let me just go back to the picture of it. So on the left, right here is the mainly Catholic, which is green, and the Protestant areas, which are orange, and the red is the walls that separate them. They were put up towards the end of the Troubles to try to sort of separate the two communities and stop any conflict between them. Now they are still up, and there was actually a poll held in 2020 or something where a lot of the civilians, both Protestant and Catholic, wanted to keep the walls there. But yes, there are like gates, there are doors, you can walk between them, but it is a lot sort of symbolic there as well.
So do they keep to themselves usually, or do they don't like leave mix?
Not really. There's still a lot of tensions between the two groups, and though the Good Friday Agreement did put an end to the violence, there's still, Protestants and the Catholics are still not super fond of each other.
Thank you.
Jake Smith.
I know that the U.S. has a very strong presence in Northern Ireland. I know the ambassadors from Massachusetts. During the Troubles, did the U.S. ever, you said they supported Northern Ireland, did they ever offer military support?
They never offered military support, but George Mitchell, who was a retired U.S. Senator, was sent to assist in peace talks. Originally, President Clinton didn't really want anything to do with Northern Ireland. He thought it was sort of a political, like, slippery slope to touch. But a lot of Irish Americans, since it's an important demographic, especially in the 60s, a lot of Irish Americans urged President Clinton to play a role in the peace process. And the IRA especially didn't want to decommission their weapons. So the United States stepped in and they sort of acted as a mediator to help the two groups sort of talk to each other and come to an agreement. Yeah.
I noticed that in the graph around 1998 when the treaty was signed, there was a big spike in the number of killings that were occurring, when it seemed like from about in the previous years that declined. What was that spike caused by?
So I did a little bit of research into that. There actually, believe it or not, was not a lot to talk about. But I know that there was radicalists on both sides that were not a fan of the Good Friday Agreement, and I'm sure that definitely has something to do with it. But I do not know like any exact reason why that happened. Mr. Melo.
You said that part of the Good Friday Agreement said that if a majority voted that they want to join Ireland as a state, they could. Was that a one-time vote when this was passed, or is it every X amount of years they redo a vote?
If the Northern Ireland Assembly, if they get representatives in there that feel that they want to hold the vote can be held at any time, however many times they want to hold it. Yeah.
Do you plan on going to Ireland to visit these places that you've been researching about?
I would love to, but I do not have any plans currently to. No. Olin?
You know, if the Troubles, like that period, fueled a lot of immigration of Irish citizens to the U.S. and other countries to flee this conflict, because I know there was a lot of immigration of Irish to the U.S. Did that happen during this period?
There definitely was. It was only mainly in Northern Ireland, so a lot of the civilians just went back to Great Britain. They didn't come to the U.S. The big thing for Irish immigration to the U.S. was in the 1850s with the potato famine. That was the biggest time when a lot of Irish fled Ireland and came to the United States. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Pressing source search, and you go to HDMI 2. Press source search one more time and it should toggle. There it is.
Is everyone okay with me starting? Okay. You probably already know me because I was the one that handed out the papers, and that will be brought up. I would love if you guys could participate. So the topic I decided to do was Black American prison literature from Parker Brown. I particularly wanted to look at specifically narratives by currently incarcerated Black people, or at least they wrote it while they were incarcerated, about their experience and what it means to be Black and incarcerated in America. So I looked from pieces all the way from around the early 1800s all the way to current day. If you notice, most of your quotes are actually, 2 of the quotes are actually from women that are currently incarcerated. So that my main question that I asked myself was, what is the reason the genre came to be? And why is it influential? And before we get into the quotes, I want to look at the timeline. Of course, this is really rough. If you're a U.S. history student, you'll be like, this is not exactly how it went down, but it's the rough days. But 1820s was when American prisons began. They began in two places, Pennsylvania and New York. Pennsylvania started with the Quakers, and they decided that the best way to rehabilitate incarcerated people was to put them in a room by themselves 24 hours a day and just make them think. The New Yorkers thought that was stupid, and they instead thought, hey, we're going to have you be in separate cells, but then for most of the day, you're going to come and you're going to work, because that's going to be your punishment. You're going to have to think about your crime, and you're going to have to suffer for your crime, and you're going to have to labor for your crime. You can see where this is going when it relates to Black Americans. And very quickly, New Yorkers were actually leasing out their convicts to private companies. But then, 1865 happens with the 13th Amendment. What did the 13th Amendment do? Come on, someone who knows a thing. Mr. Brooks!
That slavery is illegal except in instances of a crime.
Exactly. So, chattel slavery existed up until 1865. Of course, there was still chattel slavery happening, but for the most part, it was supposed to end in 1865. George Jackson, a Black revolutionary, says about chattel slavery, the chattel is a property. One man exercising the property rights of his established economic order, the other man as that property. The owner can move that property and hold it in 1 square yard of the earth's surface. Sounds slightly like what being in prison is like, and having full control over another person's body. So what ended up happening was people didn't want to end slavery, so they decided to have this form of slavery that was contracted or indebted. Sharecropping, if you know what it is, was pretty much the system where I, as a plantation owner, would give you a segment of my land to work and provide crops, and in turn, you would owe me some of those crops and some of your money. Very quickly, it became a power dynamic where I would make sure that you kept being indebted to me and kept having to work for me, and it became enslavement. As well as Black Americans who often did not have an education, could not read because they and their parents were enslaved and so didn't have access to education, would literally sign contracts unknowing of what it would do that literally said, you are now enslaved to me. But this ended around in the 1940s due to the Great Depression and just changing economic standings when it came to farming. And then 1955 to 1968, roughly, was the Civil Rights Movement, where we saw huge rises in political ideas, including the Civil Rights Movement, sort of what Bryce was talking to some degree. But we had the Black Power Movement, we had Martin Luther King Jr., we had Malcolm X, this is where we had George Jackson, this is where we had Angela Davis. It's a big moment for Black political theory. And then in the 1970s is when the beginning of mass incarceration began with the war on drugs. And actually, I have a statistic from 1992 to 1993 where Black people were 6 times more likely to go to prison than white people in America. And those statistics have not stopped. So what ended up happening from the 1820s all the way to modern day is convicted enslavement. People are being enslaved because of a punishment for a crime. And we'll talk about this when it comes to our quotes, but something important to notice for this whole timeline is Black Americans have been protesting. And the protest that I'm specifically going to be looking at is the protest through their words, through writing. So, quote time. Pull out those quotes that I gave to you, and while you read them, I want you to think, what does this tell us about incarceration? Who has the power in this quote? And how does this quote demonstrate dehumanization and or humanity? I'll give you guys a second to read that. Okay. I'm seeing some heads go up, so I'm going to continue. And the quotes will also be on the screen. So if you want to read them for also the quotes that you don't have, go ahead. So the first one is this quote. which is by Quanetta Harris, who luckily I've been able to interview. She's currently incarcerated in Texas. This quote comes from her when she is working on the field. It is what the guards literally make her chant. So, can you guys raise your hand if you had this quote? Thank you. That was brave of you. So, I'm going to ask you, what does this quote sound like? One of you guys can raise your hand.
I don't have this quote, but it sounds like a song that you might, or like, what the song like, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or something like that, like a song you might, slaves might sing while they're working.
Yeah, it sounds like a,
Yeah,
Slaves,
that's what.
it does.
Thank you,
And
Dr. Madden.
this is being said, and if you look at the sourcing, she told me this in 2024. She's only been incarcerated for 17 years. This has happened in the 21st century. That's absurd. So, when did you tell me about this? I just told you. And how would this make you feel if you were made to sing this while you are working a cotton field? Monica?
God.
Bad, why? Oh, Dr. Madden?
I was just gonna say, they're made to perform a reenactment of enslavement.
Yeah. Oh, Ms. Chambers?
Oh, I mean, agree with that, but I think there's a level of demoralization that comes with doing that sort of labor for nothing that then is added by having to chant while you do it. It's an extra layer of cruelty.
Yeah. And then last one, Ms. Here.
Yeah, I was gonna add on to that by saying, like, almost by chanting that, it's adding on to having to do what they're forced to do. They're saying, boss, don't be so mean, we go and get your fields clean. So I feel like it's almost like being extra cruel than they already could be, because they know that they're forced to even say that. So
Yeah.
they're forced to do it.
Yeah, the guards are not only controlling their bodies, but also what they say. And then also, when you say this, you're getting the mindset of, I am a laborer for someone else. That's really, really, really dehumanizing. The next quote is by Latasha Brown, who is also currently incarcerated. Can you raise your hand if you guys got that quote? Okay, thank you. So what does she mean by being dead named by her inmate number? Mr. Melo?
She's no longer addressed by any sort of given name by a family member or anything. She's reduced to kind of like people were in Nazi Germany in concentration camps. You were a number, not a person, not a name.
Exactly. You're not a person. You're just an inmate. And also, just what is she describing in this quote? Through what? Nisheen? Oh no, Chris.
Sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse. Her body is being used also sexually. I should have given a trigger warning before this, I'm sorry. But yeah, this is not uncommon. I kept reading over and over again from Black incarcerated women that they were being sexually abused. And that happened on the plantation. They are so dehumanized that their body, their sex, their mind is not their own. Okay, last quote, Iceberg Slim, who has my favorite bio, which is formerly incarcerated, former pimp, and current writer, who got this quote. Okay, thank you. So, why does this give him power? Why does this make him feel like a man? Yes, you.
Okay, so it says, I assured him that my friend would make public the contents of the letters if I did not get my legal release date. So, in this instance, if he does not get something that he's entitled to, he has a form of recourse, which he normally wouldn't have a form of legal recourse of any kind, but he has the publicity recourse of releasing letters and letting it be known publicly otherwise.
Exactly. And there's power in being able to tell the abuses that are happening to you. Like, I think when we all read this, I think most of you guys were like, this is happening in currently incarcerated facilities. Like, that's crazy, and it enlightens you. And so that, a lot of these pieces were talking about how they were writing to get it out, even just a little bit. And then the last question I'm going to ask is, do you think this did anything? Did you think him threatening this guard, this official, with releasing this information got him his legal release date? I'm seeing a lot of shakes. Yeah, you're correct, because he doesn't have the power. He can even try to threaten with exposing this, but he doesn't, because he's continuously censored. All of these people are continuously censored. You've probably never heard of Iceberg Slim. He's a really influential black political theorist, particularly in incarcerated spheres. But his work is very suppressed because it's revealing stuff like this. They're just holding him for longer to use his body for labor. So this is how I came with my thesis. Black American prison literature is important due to the authors being able to express their humanity by taking control of the narrative, highlighting their mistreatment, and protest the dehumanizing nature of being black and incarcerated in America. Any questions? Yes, Dr. Madden.
So I wonder about the use of the word dehumanizing, and if we can think of a substitute. Because when we say, like, and what kinds of words might we use that might be more helpful to leverage the power of what you're saying in the end there? Because I love what you were saying about I appreciate your presentation, and I learned stuff from your presentation, and I think the power of the written word from people who are incarcerated is actually something we should be highlighting and thinking about as power. But I also think that the punishments enacted by, like, this quotation that I had, which was the performance of the song, is a punishment that was enacted precisely because the person in power knew that that incarcerated person is a person. Right? So this is actually Walter Johnson's thesis, is not me. But Walter Johnson says we should stop using he's a historian of slavery. He says we should stop using the word dehumanize because actually it allows the historian to think of the slave owner as someone who imagines the enslaved people as being something other than people. And no, in fact, because they knew they were people, they exacted precisely this humiliation, this extra humiliation. It's not just the work, but actually the perform a song for me.
Yeah.
That is an extra leverage of power. And so my question is just, what other language might be useful? Like, I get the use of the term dehumanize, and I'm not totally against it, but I just think it might let some of his historical actors off the hook.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The reason I chose the word dehumanize is I just kept coming across writings where people were literally saying, like, one person I'm blanking on her name, but in a poem on being counted, she literally said that the number she was assigned, like, sublet the space in her soul. Like, it had replaced her. And so that's why I went with the word dehumanize. I have you editing my paper for a reason, because I knew you could give me this advice. So I think I could choose a better word, but right now when I'm on the spot and really nervous, I don't think that's going to come to me. Ms. Chambers?
This is great, and I'm still thinking about that first quote that we analyzed, and how spirituals that enslaved folks sang actually were the key to their freedom, right?
Yes.
Like, in those songs, there's lyricism and meaning around how you were going to get out and flee, right? And then so there's this extra layer there of having a guard instruct you to sing a song. It's the opposite of freedom, right? These songs are not the key to freedom in this current prison industrial complex. That's not my question. My question is, what got you interested in this topic? And there's so much you can talk about when it comes to the prison industrial complex, right? And what got you interested in the writing?
So I want to be an English teacher in juvenile detention centers specifically. So I am really impassioned. I hate how our system treats these people, and I love analyzing literature, so I decided to combine that. Also, Mr. Doubleday allowed us to have an assignment in AP African American where we did a presentation on a topic we were interested in. And I was reading Angela Davis's autobiography, and I decided I just want to dive deeper into this because she keeps mentioning pieces like George Jackson, Malcolm X, all these other things. And I was also thinking, like, what is the one required Martin Luther King Jr. thing that we're usually made to read? It's his letter from a Birmingham jail. And I was like, why is that the impactful piece we read from him? And it's a really good piece. I just wanted to unpack that. And I ended up not able to going into Malcolm X and Angela Davis and Martin Luther King Jr. just because I wanted to more focus on obscure ones to see what the general population was instead of what we were just seeing. So that's why I was interested. Thank you. My mother.
Hi, everyone. The woman who's incarcerated in Texas who you corresponded with,
Yeah.
what does she say about prison writing?
So I asked her why she wants to write, and she said, I have no choice to. She's particularly enraged that children are being sent to incarceration. Her neighbors are 17 and 18 years old, our age, or just a little bit older, and that really upset her. So she thinks that if people heard it, they would change, that they would see that this system is really inhumane, that it's not treating them like respectable people. It's actively trying to do the opposite, like what Dr. Maddock and Ms. Chambers said. And so that's why she said that she writes, and when she reads other pieces, she finds that they are critiquing the system because they don't want it to exist. Yes?
How bad were like the laws that they broke for them to from these systems?
So I only included one person's crime in my paper because I felt like the biggest thing is that we reduce them to criminals. But for example, what quote did you have?
I had
No, it's okay.
I shared him.
Yeah, so you had Iceberg Slim. He was a pimp. So he convinced his first girlfriend to be a prostitute and to work for him. And then when he got out of prison he did this when he was 18, when he got out of prison, he was really poor. He didn't want to be a pimp again, but he felt like he had no option, so he did it again, and he went back into prison. So that is a crime that they did. But, like, Juanetta's inmates, the people she's next to, some of them are petty crime. Any other questions this year?
Do you think that, well, actually, I want to say, I feel like the word dehumanizing almost makes sense for this, especially with how kind of like there's many instances where African American or Black people have said themselves it has felt dehumanizing and or something like that. So my question is to you, well, first off, that's the compliment, but my question is to you, have you looked into Angola prison system in Louisiana? Because that's a very popular one. I know my dad lived 40 miles from it when he was growing up as a kid. Have you looked into that system? Because many people around the area, African American, do count that as like a modern day slavery, especially with examples as people like the guards riding on horses with a baton in their hand who they actually like will beat people. So
yeah, well, I did not come across that exact prison. I wish I talked to you because I would have looked into it and see if I could find someone from there. But again, that's not just there. Juanetta described like the man that was making her sing that song was on horseback with a gun. Another person actually in Connecticut has described that when they're working on like the side of the road, that when her friend stumbled across a snake, and what do you do when you stumble across a snake? You probably run, right? Well, this incarcerated woman was running from the snake, and this guard thought that she was running away, and so he was going to shoot her, but one of her friends grabbed her and pushed pushed her down and she missed the bullet. So it's not just happening there. Aster?
I was wondering, especially with like the spirituals, like how you thought about how, because you talked about how it was dehumanizing the person, but also, I don't know, I kind of saw by using the spirituals, which was such like a powerful like tool during enslavement, how it kind of diminished and like kind of mocked their culture in a way, and I don't know what you kind of like thought about that.
Well, yeah, I think Ms. Chambers brought that up a little. Yeah, they, like, the prison knows what they're doing. For example, George Jackson, he was accused of starting a prison riot with 2 other black men. All 3 of them did not know each other. Guess why all 3 of them were decided to be the ones that started this prison riot?
Is it because the hair?
Yes, it's because their hairstyle. They had Afrocentric hairstyles. They all had afros. So the system does target black people, and that's like, I was trying to prove that. So yeah, they for sure take cultural elements and also just like stereotype. Any other questions? I think this will be the last one.
Okay, my question was at the end, you were sort of talking about, you know, my quote from Iceberg Slim, like, you know, he sort of waged, you know, I guess a threat in a way, you could say to like a prison guard or whatever, and you were like, well, it ultimately didn't work because they suppress his writings.
Yeah.
So I guess this is like maybe a bit of a leading question because I have something in mind, but like, can you think of other reasons why like this might not work in terms of, you know, getting his legal release date or like getting the things he's legally entitled to or anyone is legally entitled to?
Well, yeah, something that was constantly coming up is that, like, I think we all know this, that like, you can get out of prison for good time, and that's mainly given to white incarcerated people, but also you can like get charged with crimes while you're in, or like get offenses. And so a lot of people did get like for example, Panetta, she's like she's always in solitary confinement because she's trying to reach out to the press.
Okay.
And they're saying that that could hurt the victim's family. And so it could be, they could keep them in prison under the guise of victim protection.
Okay.
And also just other things that they're like, oh, you assaulted a guard, all of that. It can be a very self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's really interesting. The piece about how you're punished for even trying to speak out, and then that's something that can keep you in prison.
Yeah. But thank you guys so much.